Hi, everyone. My name's Kelly. I use she, her pronouns, and thank you so much for joining us. You might be wondering who we are and what we're doing. And so, why don't I start with the who and tell you a little bit about us? We call ourselves the Living Our Values group, or the Love group. And specifically, we are the white staff at Legal Voice. We took our name from a phrase that we use a lot on the staff, and that is, are we living our race equity values? We ask that of ourselves all the time. And, that's an important part of who we are. We'll tell you a little bit more about each of us in just a minute, but why don't I first talk about what we're doing? And I should probably point out that we're all a little bit nervous. We haven't done this sort of thing before, so we yeah, there you go. So okay, what are we doing? So the easiest way to explain that might be to give you a little bit of background on kind of what led us to this point. You probably know that Legal Voice has been around a long time, over 40 years. And throughout that time, we've done trainings, we've done, readings about racism. And even with that, we struggled with really fully understanding the connection of race and gender, the intersection of race and gender. And we also struggled with change, particularly in our white leadership culture. So that was a really challenging thing, and it impacted a lot of the things, a lot of our staff, a lot of our board, and we could recognize at times that there was an issue there, but we struggled with how to break out of that. We knew that we were doing a lot of good work, but we also realized that we were missing something. And it might have been, in fact, it probably was quite obvious to a lot of people what we were missing. And what we were missing is that we really weren't an organization that supported all communities of women. So close to 3 years ago, we as a staff decided to fully engage in race equity work, and we committed to efforts that would help us change, help us better understand this work. And so we did seminars and retreats, and we read books, and we shared articles. We hired a consultant to help us, and we had the consultant work on a diversity, equity, and inclusion report for our leadership and our board and our staff. And we formed a race equity team, who were members of the staff that would really guide us through this process going forward. We learned we had a lot to do. We learned we were going to fail frequently. We also learned that although all of our staff was committed to this process, we weren't all in the same place as far as our understanding of race equity goes. We have a lot of different lived experiences on our staff. Some of us are white, like you're seeing here. Some of us are persons of color. We have different age diversity. We have, a number of things that actually make us different in our lived experiences, but we also had a different understanding of race equity. And we knew that those of us, the white staff, knew that we also had a personal journey because we had a lot of catching up to do. And so each of us actually kind of embarked on our own learning and our own growth. And we recognized during that time that this would be a lifelong pursuit for all of us, and that we needed support, and we needed encouragement, and we needed accountability to help us really move through the work. And so we believed that learning was our own responsibility, that no one owed us their time or their knowledge or their understanding. It was our responsibility. We realized that we were constantly up against the impact of our white privilege. We recognized that we were going to fail, and we did fail a lot, and that hurt others and it hurt us. We hoped that by forming this group, we could help each other to kind of work through some of those mistakes, learn from each other. We hoped that we could talk about, how we were showing up in different spaces, how we talked, in groups, how we were to participate, how we were to engage. We, shared with each other different ideas and comments around how to do that. And what we were looking for really was a way to move forward to truly transform ourselves and Legal Voice. And so basically we were seeking to be better allies in this work. And we meet every other week. We read books and we share articles and we discuss them. We, bring up maybe stumbles or failings that we've had, and we work through those together and talk about them. If we're worried about maybe how we're going to be doing some things, we bounce ideas off of each other, and we try to save others on our staff from giving us advice or information, or from exposing them to our own ignorance. And so that's what we try to do. That's who we are. So why don't we introduce ourselves and tell you a little bit more about our own journey. So Catherine, do you want to start?
Sure, thank you, Kelly. My name is Catherine West. I use she, her pronouns. I've been at Legal Voice for about 1.5 years, and I work on a couple subject areas: gender-based violence, LGBTQ rights, family law, and campus sexual assault. I think we're each going to tell you a little bit about what this love group has meant to us. And so, like Kelly said, that lots of people are thinking about these issues and doing reading and really trying to examine their white privilege. But I found for myself that, I can read a book or I can read an article and think on an intellectual level that, like, okay, I understand that. But I have found for myself that it doesn't like sink in my skin and my soul until I have grappled with it in real life. And having a group like this that you can come to and share your ideas or your thoughts, and almost most importantly, your failures, and then, talk through how to make those things right, and be accountable when you've messed up, because that is going to happen. So the group has been, such a welcome space for growth and for accountability. I appreciate that, Kelly has kept me accountable, and just having this group has really helped for me. So it's been such a joy, and we're happy to be here with you. Kim or Chloe, you want to go next?
I'm happy to go. Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Clark. I'm an attorney at Legal Voice, and my area of focus is reproductive rights, health, and justice. And I have been practicing law for a long time. So I think my biggest challenge, and everyone in this group will attest to this, is that I tend to intellectualize everything. And I think one of the challenges or one of the dangers of doing that, and I'm really quick to point this out when it comes to men, to my own husband, to the Supreme Court, is that, there's a danger when you think you're operating strictly from, an objective, reasonable point of view, there's a danger that you sort of ignore the ways in which your own lived experiences really influence what you think is reasonable and objective. And so it probably took me longer than others to really begin to get how much I didn't know that I didn't know. And so to make that real for people, I mean, I hear a lot of people now talk about of course, everyone wants to be, anti-racist. And I of course I don't want to be a racist. I want to be anti-racist. I oppose systemic racism, but I think it took me a long time to really understand what that is, and that it is much more complex, I think, than most people realize. Also, I really struggled with some of the terminology and I'll be honest, and Kelly really helped. This is one of the ways in which this group has really helped me, and Kelly helped me very early on, was with the use of the term white supremacy. I will admit, my natural reaction was to sort of push back against that terminology and challenge. This is a term that we all think we understand, and this new use seems to be kind of contrary to our, to something that we already understand it to be. And it wasn't until, and I'll come back to that, but it wasn't until I really started to look at and be able to recognize that all the racial bias around us and all the racial bias within us that we don't necessarily naturally perceive. And so it wasn't really until I started that process myself that I was really able to get past things like just the rhetoric, and really begin to listen to the very real concerns that are being raised. And it's so important that we listen and understand those concerns, because they're incredibly important. They're nuanced. They're right. It's really important that we all take a deeper look at these things. So I started to do a lot of reading books. Our race equity training helped me a lot. I read a ton of books that helped me a lot. So you want to talk about race, white supremacy in me, the videos that go along with white supremacy in me. This group, it's just all been just incredibly helpful to me. Fortunately, we have colleagues of color who are amazingly patient, and I'm beyond grateful for that. But what this has done for me has been truly life-changing. It's like one of the best gifts, I think, in my life, to have begun to be able to interrogate the ways in which I am influenced by this culture that we live in that is steeped in white supremacy, frankly, to get back to the term that I once didn't understand. And now I, adamantly argue in favor of, because, I think it's really important. And the reason that what drew me to the book that we're going to talk about in our book club is just understanding the way in which these forces exert influence on all of us. So just so grateful to have this group, to be a part of Legal Voice, because it is definitely, in my mind, a dream that is absolutely worth fighting for. So, Chloe.
Hi, everybody. I am Chloe Phelan, and I use she, her pronouns, and I am the program coordinator at Legal Voice. And if some of you have been a fan of or a supporter of Legal Voice for a while, you may have seen my name or gotten an email from me, but never seen me in the flesh or virtual flesh, because I'm very much like a behind the scenes kind of a person. I'm not a lawyer. I support Legal Voice kind of from the back end a lot. So this is special being live on the internet for me. And I've been at Legal Voice since about 2005, and I think started as a volunteer about then. So and always kind of in this back of the house role. And so for me, I feel like it's taken all of this time since I started till now to really even begin to understand um, what is going on. uh, Lo and behold, I didn't really realize what the experience for staff of color was like working at Legal Voice or doing this work out in the world, um, until we really started focusing on it and having this group to talk through feelings or events or things that we've read, um, and kind of in coinciding with that, uh, I have a child who is in elementary school, and this other element of my life, being involved in race equity work at her school, is kind of mirroring what's happening with me at work. So it's been really, really amazingly helpful to me, both to like hear how these amazingly brilliant people articulate ideas and feelings, because I have a hard time with that. Uh, at work, for my work life, and for my personal life, and as a parent trying to raise, a blonde, blue-eyed girl in this world, and trying to, raise her to be self-aware and anti-racist parenting, anti-racist work. Um, this group has really been amazing for that. So um, I'm going to kick it back to Kim, who is going to talk a bit more about why Legal Voice is focusing so fervently on race equity.
Yeah, thank you, Chloe. Interestingly, it's, I think there might be some uncertainty out there in our community about why a feminist organization would be centering race equity in all of our work. I mean, both issues are important, but what do they really have to do with one another? And why would Legal Voice suddenly place this at the center of our work? And I think there are three. So I think I think this is something that's really important for us to talk about. And I think there are, in my mind anyway, there are three reasons why this is so important. The first of which is that, we really believe to our core that those that are most impacted by particular problems are really in the best position to architect the most, effective, sustainable solutions to those problems. And that seems to be intuitive. Um, and obviously also, if you want to do the most good, it makes sense to center the group that is the most impacted, so that you benefit everyone and not just, a particular subset of the folks who are impacted by particular social issues. But in my mind, there's another reason, which I think is maybe the most central, which is that it's really important to understand the way in which gender oppression and racial oppression are really intertwined and have been really since the outset of our republic. To understand how dating back to before the U.S. was founded, in fact, it was the white heteronormative patriarchal power structure that colonists really believed, was divinely sanctioned and gave them, the moral authority to claim land and take power and lead. And you can really pretty much trace all social policies that are aimed at racial or gender oppression or reproductive oppression since that time, as essential to reinforcing that basic power structure. And in order to reinforce that power structure, you really need to have control over the population. And in order to do that, you need to have control over the bodies of Black and brown people, and you have to have control over women, and you have to have control over reproduction. And those things have been interrelated since the beginning, since before the beginning. Um, and I think that's really critical to understand. And it's something that I think the women's rights movement has uh, sort of missed a little bit. I mean, that is something that hasn't been properly highlighted, at least not in my lifetime, by the mainstream women's rights movement. And I think that's to our detriment, because when I think about it, I think about this complex tapestry of oppressions that exists to reinforce a particular power structure. And if you're trying to unravel that and you just pull on one thread, it's obviously not going to work. And in fact, even if you pull on two threads, you say, I'm opposed to gender oppression and I'm opposed to racial oppression, but you don't understand the ways in which those are intertwined and entangled, it's impossible to dismantle either one. And so I think that is, in my mind, to put it really simply, and this is obviously worth a much longer conversation, but in my mind, that is the reason why a feminist organization would be centering, why it's absolutely critical to centering race equity in our work. It's the reason we haven't gotten past where we are today. It is how we get past where we are today. It's how we win. And I think it's something that distinguishes Legal Voice from other like organizations, frankly. So I think it's really critical, and I think those are the sort of the three main reasons why we're really focused on that. And if anyone else has anything to add, I don't want to take up all the space, but
What Kim's really said so well, and we know her for this, is really the work that Legal Voice is doing and the work that draws us to Legal Voice. But we're also here for ourselves. We're also here for personal reasons. And I think that's a really important thing for me to say, because it wasn't until I started really doing my own personal work that I felt like I had anything to contribute to this work that we're doing at Legal Voice. And, that happened late for me. I mean, middle age, you think things are supposed to be easy from then on. You think I think my sisters-in-law call it the slide. You think you're on the slide.
I'm right there with you, Kelly, though.
And then, this happens. And when we started moving on this journey, and I started to realize how far behind I was and how little I really was getting, so much of what was happening. I knew I had to do something, and I was really stuck in not knowing. My not knowing was stopping me from actually engaging in finding out. And I know that sounds completely circular, but that seemed like what was happening. And I was lucky enough to have two staff members, Michelle Johnson and Sarah McDonald, who were about to do Layla Saad's workbook that Kim referred to earlier. It's called Me and White Supremacy. It's a pretty intense book, but it was going through that workbook that I finally started to realize and see how racism and the imprint of white supremacy was showing up in me, how it was impacting my conversation, my ideas of, common sense, my rote behavior. All of these things were really impacted by white supremacy. And it was funny because once I started to get that connection, suddenly I was seeing racism everywhere. It was like it was popping in flashes just all around me. And it was also kind of a painful reckoning to realize that it had always been there. And somehow, white supremacy had really, really blinded me to what was right in front of me. And I don't know why, but I decided that I just couldn't live with it. And so I needed to pursue this work. And I saw it as this, that if I wasn't pursuing this work, then I was complicit in perpetuating the systems of white supremacy. And that truly became an unacceptable thing to me. So between my personal, growth and my work growth, I am, I think, very well placed to learn more and grow and change. So just this group really speaks to both of those sides of me. And I think that's really, really important.
Thank you, Kelly. I was going to share, I know we're going to talk about the book a bit more and then later at the end, but reading this book really made me kind of like dig deeper and look for other resources and really think about, this book is very thought-provoking. So I ended up doing some research and found a definition from Beverly Tatum, which said, racism is a moving walkway. To be actively racist is to know where the walkway is headed and choose to move along with it. To be passively racist is to stand idly by as the walkway moves in the same direction as those who are actively racist. It's a way to maintain and reinforce racial hierarchy. To be anti-racist is to turn around and actively move in the opposite direction. And I think, like what you just described, Kelly, that really pops out for me as just like, as a white person, it's so easy to just be on the walkway going in the racist direction and be, blissfully unaware. And it really takes work to turn around and get yourself right or start to see things and join the fight that Black, Indigenous, and people of color have been fighting for so long. And for us to be allies in that, it really does take dedicated work, which is part of why this group has been so great, again, personally and professionally.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It's taken us a lifetime to get where we are. It's obviously going to take a lifetime to undo, the ways in which our own biases and the ways in which white supremacy impacts all of us. And so if we really, believe in these values, and we, and we want to be effective in our work as well. You can't be without doing this personal work alongside it, because you've got to be constantly challenging yourself and testing all the ways in which you think you're being just totally logical and may be operating from a place of bias. So yeah, I could agree with everything both of you said, that this group is essential for us to stay conscious of our values, our race equity values, and kind of constantly challenge them, which is why, in fact, I chose this book, because I've been saying, as much work as we've been doing, I've been saying for the longest time, like, I just cannot understand women that could join a movement like this. I mean, the insurrection on January 6th, how could any women embrace white nationalism? And I think that idea that this is some sort of other, like white supremacy is something that isn't about me. It insulates you from like really interrogating your part in all of this. And what really struck me is just, reading this book is, it really helped to kind of challenge me to sort of deepen my understanding of like the human impulses behind what's going on here, that that again influence all of us, and and to really interrogate where these things show up in me. So I wrote the blog about the book, and one of the things that really struck me is that there are so many ways in which I would I feel we protest in the streets, against racial oppression, and then, but there's a point at which change makes us all nervous, right? And you've got to constantly be. So I think of defund the police, which I brought up in my article. there's a point at which kind of we all sort of clutch our pearls, or for me in the beginning, the use of the term white supremacy, where you just kind of freeze and don't look beyond the label. But it's so important to understand what's behind the terminology, or to dig deeper than that. And so that's what the personal work really adds. Yeah. So.
Um, so you probably noticed by now that we're quite different, all four of us, even though we are obviously extremely similar in that we pursue, our work at Legal Voice, but we are quite different. And that has been something that makes our conversations so much richer. It just seems like we naturally bring up things that the others haven't considered or thought of, or just because of our uniqueness. So I think one of the things I would definitely promote, because I hope all of you are thinking about finding friends and family, or dragging people in off the street to join you, again, is that it really does help to have people who don't have the same experience as you, people who might, maybe you have moms, maybe you don't, maybe, there's different, gender identity going on. There's all kinds of ways that you can bring in different perspectives. And it's been really, really valuable for us to have those distinctions. And I'm going to call in Chloe because we have to.
I really don't have anything more to add, you guys. I guess just from in thinking about this book, and that Kim she is the voracious reader. I mean, all of you are. I have very little time to read here in the apartment with my family and my kid here all day, and I miss my bus ride when I used to be able to read. And so for anybody who's listening who's like, I don't think I have time to read, it's like, just do what you can and still participate in the conversation, because it's really, it still brings so much to my thinking and understanding, even to talk about an article that I didn't get a chance to read, or I'll get to read it later and I'll think more deeply about it. But Kim, I'm curious to know like how you heard about this book. We haven't talked about it as a group separately yet, and so.
That's a good question. I think, so not only am I addicted to reading, but I'm also addicted to podcasts. And I think I heard a podcast with the author of this book. And I was just fascinated, by the title, and the first person who was killed during the Capitol insurrection was a woman. And so it was on my mind. And again, I've been thinking about, just how much I felt like I couldn't relate to the women in this movement, and then to really read these stories and understand the forces that were influencing these women, and to really understand what was going on. It really made me think very deeply. So, and I really appreciate all of your willingness to dive into this with me. And I hope I hope this book club will be the first. This discussion will be the first of many, because we've had such great, rich discussions about this and so many other topics through this process. I really appreciate you all. But so for those who don't know, we'll be having a discussion of the book, Sisters in Hate by Sayward Darby, on, I believe it's March 10th at 5:30. We'll be getting back together on Facebook Live to talk about the book. We'll be talking a little bit more about the relationship between gender and racial oppression throughout history. Why white nationalism seems to have greater appeal during certain periods of social political, during specific social, political, and historic moments, and how social media is amplifying that, and then delve into the three stories of the women that are profiled in the book, and what we each kind of learned about ourselves in the process of reading this book. But to Kelly's point, I would also highly recommend, if you are getting together and reading this book and you haven't done any other reading on these topics, we have a couple of books also that we'd recommend for folks who want to start this kind of personal journey. Things like White Fragility and So You Want to Talk About Race. Those are great places to start. Me and White Supremacy also. Though I might start with one of the other two. But we really hope this will be an ongoing conversation, because it's so central to the success of our mission, and we are very committed to this as an organization, and really would like to share our experience with those in our community.
One of the other books that we've talked about is White Tears, Brown Scars, which really goes through like a long history of all of the ways that white women have not honored the needs or the rights of Black, Brown, Indigenous women. And back to kind of what I was saying earlier about like I had just read that book, and then was in a situation with work and was thinking about how to best message and invite some folks of color into that conversation. And I ended up completely messing it up and coming to this group to talk about it. And so like, again, I knew on an academic level about the ways that like whiteness can be such a barrier and can cause harm to people of color. And yet, I caused harm myself. And so I think, especially because we are on this moving walkway where, we're all sort of complicit in this racist society, it's so good to have people to hold you accountable. But so speaking of being very different individuals, I am the kind of person that like apparently really likes definitions, and because I was like, I think we need to talk about the definitions of white nationalism and white supremacy. And I think for myself, like I obviously had a working understanding of what both of those things were, and maybe didn't think deep enough about them, because in this book, the author does share definitions, and Jen's gonna share the author's definitions on the screen. So white nationalism is defined in the book as the belief that America should remain a predominantly white country led by white people. I think that's fairly intuitive, awful, but pretty intuitive, and probably implicitly thought by lots of people without realizing that that is a tenet of white nationalism. I think people, if you asked them, they would reject white nationalism as a concept, but truly may have some, embedded beliefs that maybe that's correct. And, that's a painful thing to reckon with. The book also defines white supremacy. And this one really, for me, for whatever reason, really just clicked. So a political, economic, and cultural system in which whites overwhelmingly control power and material resources, conscious and unconscious ideas of white superiority and entitlement are widespread, and relations of white dominance and non-white subordination are daily reenacted across a broad array of institutions and social settings. So I don't know why, but this definition and particularly the relations of white dominance and non-white subordination really just flashed out at me. Because when I think to, you know, incidents, and it really is the white dominance that can be such a strong and pervasive part of white supremacy, and non-white subordination. So, you know, we've probably all seen, there was a little 9-year-old girl who was handcuffed and pepper sprayed by the police, you know, because she wasn't complying. There was also, like, I think a 15-year-old Black girl sent to jail for not doing her homework. And it's impossible to think that that would happen to white girls. So yeah, just for me, for whatever reason, this framework and talking about these definitions, or for me to have these in my mind and really replay things we're seeing in the media, things people are experiencing, it's impossible to not see white supremacy sort of everywhere.
Yeah.
I would add that it's for me now, it's impossible not to see white nationalism in, you know, when Kim first brought this up, when we were looking at what happened at the Capitol, and you know, it's certainly not the first time I've thought about this, but it isn't something I had thought of as simply being a constant since, you know, before this country was formed. I mean, it was how this country was formed, like Kim pointed out earlier. I mean, it's a constant. So it's not something that ever went away in our culture. It may have been something that was simmering sort of below the sort of collective consciousness, but I'm sort of coming to a reckoning with that this has been here. This has been part of our way of life, part of our culture, and it's been harming people all along. And why is that? Why did we why do we perpetuate this? You know, because that's what we do. We perpetuate it. We didn't, you know, stop it ever. So yeah, that's one of the things that, thank you, Kim, you have
Yeah.
been
I think,
with.
I think what resonates with me about that description, or what's powerful about that description of white supremacy and what's so important about it, is that it's not about intentional. Most people will say, I am not a white supremacist. I do not believe in the supremacy of the white race over other races. And that's appalling. But what it speaks to is that there is a power structure in this country that we have all become used to. And some of us benefit from it more than others. And it's the degree to which you're able to embrace change, you know, and you know, or to there, you know, it's a question of how much you're willing to resist that, or how, you know, and it's, I actually think that the quote that you raised, Catherine, about the or the walkway, the moving walkway, is incredibly powerful. Do you stand on the walkway where you know you're, you know, of a system that you know is benefiting you, or do you resist it? And that is what white supremacy really is all about. And it took this book, I think, for me to realize that white supremacy is the right term, because this is all about power, and we're all somewhere on that continuum. And what to me is the difference is how willing we are, how able we are to embrace change. And the more threatened we are by change in social norms, change in demographics, the more likely we are perhaps to embrace, this more rigid traditional power structure. But these same things are affecting all of us. And so to my question about like, how is it that women could embrace this book helped me understand that, if that makes sense. So that's why I dragged you all into reading Sisters in Hate, which is it's a very thought-provoking book. So we really hope folks will join us in reading it.
I would say one other thing about the book is just made me really think about, I really think of white nationalism as a cult. Maybe that's too strong of a word, but like some of their recruitment tactics are very, it's very subtle. They don't, lay out for people like, this is what we're about. And, we are inviting you in. It's very, it's covert. They know it's a controversial and that people's instinct would be to say like, oh no, I don't want to be part of that. And so I've just been doing a lot of like psychology, and I was a psychology major. So this is bringing up like major psychology thoughts of mine, of like, how do you talk to someone in a cult, and how do you try and my worldview is so different from theirs. How would I even approach trying to like bridge that divide and forge any common ground? So again, very thought-provoking book. Really recommend people join us on this journey.
I would also say that the book highlights the fact that there isn't a stereotype that participates in white nationalism. And I know better than to believe in stereotypes. I know better than to like have some sort of notion of the type of person who does something. And this book really clobbered me on that as well, and just reminding me that, what leads us down a path is varied, and that we can't other each other in this context either. So recognizing that this is part of our vast humanity, it's hard, it's painful, but it's pretty important. So this book also helped me. I don't know if helped me is the right word. This book pushed me to hear that and recognize it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good point, Kelly. I had the same reaction. Definitely, I had a preconceived notions that I was disabused of reading this book. And to be sure, Catherine, to your point, the examples, and the folks who are participating in these movements are definitely on an extreme. But like I said, what I thought was interesting are just the human. The natural human tendencies that drive this is what I found for me was kind of the most interesting thing to consider as I was reading this. But yeah, so we want to thank everyone for your time, and we really hope that you all will join us for our next meeting on March 10th. Can't emphasize enough again how just central this work is to our mission. And we want to make sure that to the extent that, there's any people have questions about how gender and racial oppression are connected and interrelated, we want to be addressing those, and we want to be talking about these issues as openly as we can be. And even when that makes us all a little bit nervous. Just thank you so much for your time.
And we want to thank our coworker Jen for telling us all we have to remain smiling through the end of this. If we didn't have her, this wouldn't be happening.
And
So
for supporting us in 100 different ways.
Oh.
Yes, Jen.